Welcome to Launchpad, a Tech Blast podcast which reveals what is needed to scale a successful technology startup. In each episode, industry players such as entrepreneurs and investors will discuss one aspect of growing a technology company and offer practical advice for scaling your business. In this episode, we are joined by Martin SFP Bryant, founder of PreSeed Now. Martin is a technology journalist with long experience covering startups. A former editor at The Next Web, he also served as community editor at Tech North before founding business and marketing consultancy Big Revolution and the PreSeed Now newsletter. He is also the editor of social media consultant Matt Navarro's weekly Geek Out newsletter. Martin, hello, nice to see you.
Hi, good to be here.
We've spoken back and forth for a few years. We've been covering a lot of the same ground with early stage startups, etc. You've been covering them for 15 years yourself. Just give me a little flavour of that career.
Yeah, so I started because I was in another job and just bored and couldn't find a way to move beyond the job that I had. So I thought, I like blogging, I like writing. So I started just blogging in my lunch breaks and staying late after work to just work while my fingers and my brain was in that kind of mode. And then I thought I could make a living out of this. So I applied for a job with The Next Web, which was just starting off at the time, and that grew very quickly. And within like a couple of 2.5 years, maybe I became editor-in-chief and was managing a team of tech journalists around the world, which was really exciting, covering everything from like the smallest startups to really big, tech companies like Google and Facebook and Microsoft, etc. And then after that, I thought I want to work more directly with the tech sector, especially in the north of England. I grew up in the north of England, grew up in Bradford, live in Manchester, and so I joined Tech North, the organisation that was set up to promote and develop the tech sector in the north of England. Worked with them for about a year, and then I went on to do my own thing. First of all, with Big Revolution, which was working with startups. I still do a bit of this kind of thing, working with startups. With things like mainly language related stuff, marketing copy and PR and all of those kinds of things, and then beyond branding, and then beyond that, just figured that there's not really enough coverage of really early stage startups out there, and it's a really interesting world that should be documented better. And so in the spring of 2022, I launched PreSeed Now as a twice weekly newsletter.
So two of the other newsletters that you contribute to are the Baltic Ventures newsletter, and also we talked before about Matt Navarro's Geek Out, which is every week. What does that involve, and how do you help them stand out with that language idea in mind?
Yeah, so with Matt, that's like a really popular newsletter that's got tens of thousands of subscribers. I think getting on for 50,000. I lose track, but a good number of social media professionals around the world. And for them, it's really about summarizing all the news that has happened in the social media world in the past week, and that's a lot of work. That's a lot of it's all about being concise. Sometimes some of it is about just bullet points and saying this has happened, this has happened, this has happened. You need to know about all of this. Some of it's about explaining it more, putting it into context. So there's some analysis pieces we do. Matt has a very unique, engaging style of writing, which is right there at the top of the newsletter. So really, it's about curation and putting things into a format that works for that audience. With Baltic Ventures, they brought me in because they wanted a newsletter that wasn't just here's what we're doing this month, here's the startups we're working with, here's a bit of an update. They wanted it to be something that people actually wanted to read and would look forward to opening every month. And so we took more of a content-led approach. So there's analysis of what's happening in the tech industry that people who either are startups on the Baltic Ventures Accelerator program or maybe are the kinds of startups that might want to be on it would find interesting. And also profiles of people that if you're in that world, you should know about, kind of from tech investment and startups you should know about, and even a fun bit of Liverpool lingo at the end of each edition as well.
Well, I think that's really important. We'll come on to those tips a little bit later in terms of, if a company's looking to sort of launch their own newsletter, or a person, I guess, it's not just about compiling stuff. I mean, Geek Out is curation, but actually for Baltic Ventures, it's about actually creating something that people want to read, something completely unique. So we'll come on to that a little bit later. But let's
Mm.
just stay with the startups thing for now. And we do that a lot of that with Business Cloud and now Tech Blast, where we talk to those companies that maybe don't have venture capital investment yet. They're kind of maybe scrapping for survival a little bit. They're not yet in the public eye. They might not even be on your crunch bases, etc., or certainly prominently so because they haven't recorded funding rounds. Maybe they've got grant funding. What is it in particular that attracts you to those companies?
It's the fact that they are doing something brand new. And often you can find companies that have done that are working really at the cutting edge, and they're doing things that other companies, bigger companies, might not do because they're focused on making money. So they're already kind of further down that road, and innovating into new areas might be more difficult. It's stuff that's come out of universities. Often it's university spin-outs, it's PhDs, it's people doing really exciting things based on original research. Often it might, in the cases where it's not somebody from an academic background, it's often someone with very specific domain knowledge that something they've built up over time, and they've taken that knowledge and they've turned it into a product that they've always thought that should exist. And it's a very uncertain world. And I think a lot of the media shies away from covering that part of the startup life cycle because the startups often haven't proven much yet. They haven't raised money, which would be external validation that they're something good. But I having looked at startups for so long, I like to think I've got quite a good sense of this is a good one, this is a questionable one, etc. And there are ways you can get some idea of this is actually a credible thing rather than this is just pie in the sky nonsense. And from there it's just like, here's a startup now. 2 months after we cover them, they might have pivoted into something completely different. They might have discovered that actually what we were doing didn't work commercially, even though we thought it did. The early signs said it did. So we need to change, or they might go on to great things. And really, it's about helping people in the industry and beyond discover those startups at an early stage.
There's always a pivot of some kind. So whenever you interview one of these companies that's scaled, they've raised investment and they're kind of flying, that is the question you always have to ask, right? Was there a pivot at some point? And it's like, oh, we were coming at the market in the wrong way or from the wrong end, or COVID happened. We had to completely change our business model. That's
Yeah.
a common theme, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And COVID was at the birthplace of a lot of businesses as well. The whole lockdown period spawned so many business ideas. Either people who were doing other things and thought, actually, I should turn this into a business, or were just like their business slammed to a halt and they thought we have to shut this down and we have to start something new. It's been a very interesting. So many of the companies I've written about have started during lockdowns, people collaborating because they were stuck inside, and it's interesting what can cause businesses to find that spark of inspiration to begin.
You're read by a lot of VCs, for example. So you're something of a reference tool for them to look at the next stage of companies that may be coming up. A little bit like what we do, I guess, with Tech Blast and our Startups 2.0 lists. What approach did you take to building the content, though, for PreSeed Now, seeing as it's a newsletter-led organization?
Really it's about finding interesting startups. So the core idea of PreSeed Now is it's a profile of a different B2B or deep tech startup from around the UK every Tuesday and Thursday. And there are short breaks we take in the year in the summer where tech investors, who are our primary audience, are often away. So we change the content of it in
That's
August.
not
And then
true. You just want to go on holiday. How dare you have a week's holiday in the
uh,
summer?
and then around Christmas again, it's like, is anyone actually going to read this? Is there any point us putting it out there? So we're sensible about that. But the core idea is we have these profiles, these in-depth profiles every Tuesday and Thursday. And so a lot of that is about sourcing the most interesting companies. And so that's a combination of my network. I work with Samantha Deakin. She's head of growth here at PreSeed Now. And so she's got a great network as well. She's been involved in the startup scene for around the same amount of time as I have. And so together we can source lots of interesting companies. But increasingly, as the profile of PreSeed Now has grown, startups come to us. So it's great when we get a cold pitch. Often the cold pitches are some of the most interesting companies. They kind of just come from a LinkedIn message, and then you look into them and, oh, actually, no, yeah, you're really, really good. So yeah. And then from there, it was like, well, how can we expand this? Is there other kind of content we could put out there? So a few times a year, we'll do different kinds of things as well. We'll expand into the kinds of, it's often the kind of thing I've wondered about myself, and I've never seen written about anywhere. Like, how do investors at a really, really early stage, when there aren't really any financial fundamentals at play within the business, it's still so early, how do you do due diligence on that? So we did a piece on like, what does tech due diligence look like at PreSeed, and I think that one was syndicated by another publication, because they were like, oh, actually, that's a good point, that's really interesting. And then another one, we just let founders anonymously vent about investors and what bugged them about the investment world, and that one did really well. So and we've started occasionally profiling investors as well, because in the end, it's all about connecting the dots of the early stage world. That's where we want to be. We want to be at the center of the early stage startup world in as many ways as possible.
It's like a restaurant menu, as I often think, where there's different types of content. Not everything appeals to everyone, but hopefully when you produce that newsletter, it's got some original content, it's got a feature, an in-depth interview, like you say, someone venting about VCs. I love that. I love that idea. And then some hard news for Business Cloud. It would be and Tech Blast to an extent. There's some hard news on there as a reference point as well.
Yeah.
But actually, for you, and I'm going to put the words in your mouth for you, it's about providing something that they can't get anywhere else, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. I really think that if you're going to create a newsletter that people are going to want to open, you have to be offering something that they can only get by opening that newsletter. There are a handful of newsletters I read, and I will always read them because they've got something that I won't get anywhere else. So a great example is Platformer. That's done by a journalist in the States called Casey Newton, and he writes, his colleague Zoe, they write about they're often breaking news about tech platforms, and there's so much coverage of tech platforms out there, of the big tech platforms. What's Elon Musk done now? What's whatever social platform, what are Meta doing now? And but they do it in such a unique way, and they break so many unique stories that I know that every edition is going to have something that I'm not going to read anywhere else. Whether it's a whole story that they've broken, or it's just some really good analysis of a story that's been happening elsewhere, drawing on conversations they've had with people that maybe they're not directly quoted, but that they've got great sources. So that's just one example. Axios newsletters, I go to them because they sometimes break stories, but they often are just telling you about things that have happened that other people might be covering as well. But the way they cover it, they have an ethos of smart brevity, and so they break things up into bullet points, and they are very good at neatly summarizing it and saying, here's something you should, here's something you can impress, a bit of knowledge about this you can impress people with by sounding smart. Why is this important? What's going to happen next? Just very easy to read and easy to very quickly get a summary of what's happened. So you've got to have something like that. You've got to have some kind of originality about what you're doing, and a unique reason to open that email versus anything else. Otherwise, people sign up for your newsletter because they went, oh, that sounds interesting. But then this happens to me all the time. I sign up for a newsletter, and then by the third or fourth one, I get used to seeing it pop up. I archive it without reading it, or I think, oh, I'll read it later, and then I don't, I end up deleting it or whatever. And it's very easy to get into that. So if you can get a really good open rate, then you're doing well.
What's a good open rate then? I know what ours is. You tell me what, if I'm right.
Well, yeah. So at Geek Out and PreSeed Now, we kind of aim for kind of 50% open rate, which is a lot higher than marketing emails. And I think it's probably more, 40 to 50 for a content-led email that's focused on original content is really, really good. Obviously, if you're in marketing, you expect single digit open rates and things, and but that's a very different kind of email. And so yeah, I think if you're in that kind of region, you're generally doing well.
Yeah, I think we're in the high 30s for Business Cloud. But I think what's key is actually, like you say, if you can't be first with the news, then be best with the news. I mean,
Yes.
you can't apply that to everything. Sometimes it's a press release about an investment, and you can add a bit of your own knowledge in there and a little bit of context and a bit of insight, and take out all the all the superfluous, fluffy award-winning this and proprietary that. But actually, if you can offer some insight into the journey a company's been on because maybe worked with that company before, in terms of like they're spoken on a panel at an event, or you're aware of them, or you've interviewed them, then that is really of value to the reader, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, with Business Cloud, I know that you and Chris, you've clearly got a very you've got a deep knowledge of the kinds of businesses you cover, and I know that I'm going to get a perspective there based on all that knowledge and all those years of covering these companies and talking to these companies. That's going to be different from other similar publications. So yeah, it's about having that something, that reason to be, that reason that people will come to you versus anywhere else.
How should a newsletter be laid out? I mean, you've already sort of covered this a little bit in terms of bullet points, etc. But in terms of the kind of balance between images and text.
Yeah. So for me, the test I do is I read through before I finish a newsletter. I will scroll through and say, am I getting bored visually by this? Are my eyes getting bored? And that's the way you've got to look at it. You've got to keep people scrolling. And that's a combination of images. I think having a good, strong image somewhere near the top, either right at the top or very close to the top, is important. With PreSeed Now, we tend to put it just after a brief text introduction. We'll have an image to kind of signal this is the start of the main article, for example. But then beyond that, it's even just presenting the text in a way that will keep people scrolling. So short paragraphs are very important. If you're used to academic writing, for example, they are very, very long paragraphs. But on the web, if you want to keep people scrolling, you really need to have, 1, 2 sentences is perfectly fine. Sometimes more. I try to have no more than 4 or 5 lines to a paragraph, kind of visually on the screen. And obviously, screen size affects that. So, if you can preview on different screen sizes, I always look on the mobile view. Does this paragraph look really long on mobile? Will someone stop scrolling if they're on the train or something and they're scrolling through? So that's important. And a way you can do that as well is with bullet points and numbered lists, if that can be useful. I love using those where I can. It can really help people access information quickly in a way that is visually interesting and helps break up that kind of wall of text that you absolutely must avoid. So it's a combination of images and just being smart with how you lay out the text. Just that test is, are my eyes getting bored as I read this?
You've already touched a little bit about the consistency, the importance of that. So people know your newsletter's coming on a Tuesday or Thursday, unless you have the goal to go on holiday or celebrate Christmas. How dare you? What other sort of factors should people consider when building a newsletter?
So yeah, consistency is obviously important. I think the other one is which is very important, is remembering whatever platform you're using, make sure that you back up your mailing list, because it's very easy to rely on the platform to have all your emails in there. But if they shut down overnight, you never know, or they have some massive system failure, or they get hacked, or whatever it might be, and you lose all those emails, That's a massive problem. Some people, when they're setting up a newsletter, will maybe integrate it with a CRM they've already got, and some platforms, newsletter platforms, are better at that than others. But yeah, whatever you're using, just make sure you've got a backup of that email list, because in the end, that's what it's all about, isn't it? That they're your audience. So whether that's then backing up into a CRM, or whether you're just regularly setting a reminder to yourself, if you've got a smaller kind of operation, setting a reminder to yourself to regularly download your email list as a CSV. Obviously, keep it somewhere safe. But yeah, that's so important, because otherwise you won't have a newsletter anymore.
And indeed a business, which is why I have a reminder every
Yes.
Friday at 5:30. If I can finish at 5:30, to say download your CRM, download your MailChimp, your mail database, and a
Mm.
few other things as well. What's been your approach to monetization? How do you monetize your newsletter?
So PreSeed Now has evolved in that sense over time. So when we first started, my original idea was that the first few editions would be free to read entirely, and then after that, we'd basically just go to entirely paywalled. We'd occasionally do like a free to read full, full email where it would have a roundup of all the companies we covered. But other than that, you would need to pay to read anything. But I quickly kind of, I suppose, wussed out of doing that, because I thought, if especially when you first start off, you don't have that many paying subscribers. Will people actually click pay to read this or not? And so I was kind of a bit hesitant to do that, but at the same time, I realized that the startups like to have something that's publicly readable, so something they can share, and that's great for growing our email list as well. Startups say, "Oh yeah, here's we've been featured on PreSeed Now. Here's an explanation of what we do." Some actually link to their PreSeed Now article on their homepage, because it's a good way of explaining what they do. It's kind of third-party validation that what they're doing is interesting. So yeah, so we started with that. So I started doing instead a paywall about 2/3 of the way through. So the bottom, usually it's between half and a third, bottom third of the email is paywalled. If you're a paying subscriber, you get access to more information. So it has information about funding rounds and the kinds of information that investors might be more interested in, and that kind of more advanced stuff. Then last year we thought, well, let's expand that. Let's launch a database of all the companies we've covered. So we launched the PreSeed Now Startup Tracker. That's very soon going to become a web-based product. It's currently a database you have to kind of log in through another app to access, but we're going to have a proper web-based version with a proper login and everything, and that'll be far more useful and easy to access for people. At present, though, so we work with a company called the Tech Department to build that, and really looking forward to launching that. The problem was that at the moment, because we're using Substack for our email platform, the issue is that you can't add extra tiers. So if you add extra features, like, say, a database, you can't say, "Oh, I'm going to charge more for that," because you can only charge a paid tier. You might be able to add a group subscription or something, or a free tier. There's no flexibility there. And obviously Substack then take 10% of everything. So if you're selling something that Substack has nothing to do with, like the database, then you wouldn't want them to take 10% anyway. So we're actually looking at moving to a different platform, something that's a bit more flexible, that will then allow us to over time grow our offering in different ways. And then the content obviously will stay partially paid, but it just becomes part of the mix of a broader offering.
Yeah, you're right about companies wanting to, if you say to a company, yeah, you take the time to speak to me, you're going to write it up, all that kind of stuff. And then you say, by the way, this is going to be behind a paywall.
Yeah,
Their eyes
exactly.
kind of roll, don't they? A hard business
Yeah,
person would say, charge for your content. But I think the reality is actually it's the added value that you want to charge for, isn't it? And people
yeah.
get that, whether it's a pitching event with Tech Blast, whether it's, your newsletter where you're sort of saying to the investors, come and, come to the startup tracker. And that's also obviously the recurring revenue as well. So content business is obviously a service business. It's very time intensive, very resource intensive. But actually, if you can get that kind of platform of your historic articles, your historic newsletters, the data that goes around it, and get people to sign up to that and actually service it themselves, then that is more a kind of traditional tech business, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I should add that we also have some sponsorship occasionally, advertising. So there's some of that as well. So that's a way of monetizing the free emails. So it's a mix of things, really. And we're, a startup of a kind ourselves anyway. We're certainly a small media business, kind of expanding beyond media over time. What is media? That's the question here. Is a database media? It depends what we're going to move into next. We've got lots of opportunities, so we'll see how we go.
Anything you want to talk about now, or is that just staying between you and
Um,
Samantha?
I, well, when we're ready, we want to be sure that we're announcing the right things. But all I'll say is we're announcing the right things that we've definitely made sure that we're confident we're going to go ahead with. So I won't give any specifics away right now, except to say that I want to make sure PreSeed Now is right at the center of the early stage tech startup world in the UK.
You mentioned Substack. Jamie
Mm.
Hardesty, someone who we both know well, uses his Substack to deliver his Friday news roundup from the Northeast tech sector. So it's useful for that. But you
Mm.
say it has its limitations with trying to monetize and create those kind of tiers. Is there any other pros and cons for other newsletter platforms for anyone looking to launch it? Because obviously you start it, you come there and you go, oh, do we go to MailChimp, for example? Do we go to
Yeah.
Substack? And until someone like your good self tells them the potential
Yeah.
for each, you don't know.
Y- Yeah, I mean, there are quite a few different platforms now, so I maybe can't go through all of them in detail. But yeah, people obviously think of MailChimp because MailChimp is, it's been around for years and years and years. It's definitely more of a marketing email type thing. Its interface is far more designed for marketing emails. Its pricing is far more around advertising and marketing rather than around content. So if you are thinking of a content-led newsletter, then it's not really the suitable. It's not really the right kind of platform. There's uh, Campaign Monitor, which again is more kind of marketing led, but maybe has a bit more of the ability to do the content side of things as well, and kind of hooks into the CRMs and things like that. On the more specifically content led thing, Substack is definitely the most famous one, and it's great. Its interface is very minimal. It doesn't offer a lot of customization. You can't really, if you wanted to do a 3 column uh, layout or something, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend for an email. But if you want that kind of flexibility to have different colored text and all sorts of different layouts and things, it doesn't offer that at all. It's very kind of opinionated in how it thinks your newsletter should look, which is fine for a lot of things because it looks good. It looks they've thought hard about how it's presented, and so it's easy to read. It's easy to put together. The interface works really well. Another consideration with Substack is their content moderation policy, which is very minimal. They have this kind of we just want to let whoever come to our platform and publish whatever they want,
Which
which
is it's in
sounds,
the news at the moment because there's a lot
yeah,
of so let's call them far right people are using that
yeah.
newsletter and because of their hands-off approach and a
Mm.
few prominent people have sort of pulled away from the platform as a result. Yeah.
Yeah. So and they responded to that initially by saying that they don't like it either, but in the end it's better to provide a platform for these people to expose their views. Sunlight is the best disinfectant and things. I'm not sure about that. I don't agree with that, to be honest. I think in the end you are associating your brand with incredibly hateful people, and that's not a good look. And by extension, if you are on that platform, you are kind of associating yourself with the brand that then is happy to associate itself with and take money from these people. So yeah, they Substack did say, after all the furore around it, say they were going to remove, I think, 5 um, Nazi linked platform newsletters, but not all of the ones that had been found by people who'd been looking into this. And they didn't say they were going to remove things like that as standard in future. So that's a problem. That's something to think about when you choose a platform. You know, are they taking money from people that you might morally not want to be connected with, or just even just for business reasons might not want to be connected with. So that's something to think about. There are other ones. Beehive is a great platform. We use that for Geek Out. That's developing very quickly. That's built by the tech team behind a very popular US business newsletter called Morning Brew. They went away from that to launch their own startup. So it's well worth looking at that. Ghost is another platform as well. So there's an increasing number of options out there.
And WordPress, no less. I wasn't even aware of
Yeah,
this. It's well hidden, this, isn't it? You mentioned this to me the
yeah,
other day.
yeah. So I only know about this because I saw people talking about leaving Substack on social media, and people who work for Automatic, who are the parent company behind WordPress, popped up and said, "Oh, did you know that WordPress offers a newsletter platform as well that kind of integrates with your blog and things?" So I don't think they necessarily explain it very well, but it's worth looking out there for it if you use WordPress anyway, because that might be something that could work for you.
Okay, so this is part of the pod where we ask you for your rocket fuel. So
Mhm.
basically, summarize what you've told me today in a few quick fire tips. So if someone was only going to listen to, and I'm sure they'll listen to the whole thing, but if someone was only going to listen to 30
Sure.
seconds to a minute of this podcast, what is it that you would tell them?
Okay, so first of all, make sure you're providing something that people can't get anywhere else, something that will make them open your newsletter and look forward to opening your newsletter and tell other people about it. Because if you're not doing that, you're not going to get anywhere. Make sure that people's eyes don't get bored. So break up your text. Don't have big block paragraphs. Break it up into chunks of text, small chunks of text with bullet points, images to help guide people through and add some visual interest as well. Consistency is important. Make sure that if you're publishing every week, you publish the same day every week around the same time. It doesn't have to be bang on exactly the same time, but make sure people get used to seeing you in their inbox at a certain time. Because if you break that, then people, you're out of the rhythm, and people might stop opening you because you suddenly appear 2 weeks late and on a different day, and then they're not in their inbox at that time. I used to do another newsletter years ago, and mainly just to kind of scratch the mental itch of writing every day. And people who read that looked forward to it tying in with their morning coffee break. So they would, when it arrived in their inbox, they would make a coffee and sit down and read it. And so having that kind of relationship in terms of time with your audience is really important, and you get that through consistency. Make sure you back up. That would, I say, would be the third one. Make sure you own your audience and can take them elsewhere when you want to. And I think they would be the main ones.
Well, then we always finish every podcast with a little bit of personal info about a person, trying to, who is Martin Bryant? Tell me something about yourself that might surprise me or the listeners.
So a few years ago, I started using the name Martin SFP Bryant, which was kind of personal SEO, because back when I was working for other people, it wasn't as much of an issue, but it became more of an issue when I started working for myself, and I wanted people to be able to find me, and they were Googling Martin Bryant. They would find Australia's most prolific mass murderer. Who has exactly the same name as me, including the same middle name. And so I couldn't even call myself Martin J. Bryant because he's got the same middle initial. So I thought, well, how do I deal with this? And years ago, I used to make music under the name The Starfighter Pilot, and so I'd been using social media under the name Martin SFP for years, and most of my usernames around the internet for different platforms is Martin SFP. So I thought, well, how about I call myself Martin SFP Bryant, and then that will be instant SEO because Google, for example, will have social profiles for that, and it worked. it worked. And so it can be a problem, you appear on like the BBC or something, and you have to kind of convince them, please call me Martin SFP Bryant. And usually they're like, oh, did you make that name up? I don't think it sounds a good idea for us to call you that. But then when you explain it, often they'll kind of realize it's something a bit like a stage name almost. So yeah, to disassociate with myself with a murderer, I partially changed my professional name.
So you gave yourself 3 letters in the middle of your name rather than after your name. You think that's real?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it's a nice little talking point as well. I just have to remember to not tell the same person twice, because it becomes boring if you say that tell it to someone twice. But it's interesting enough that it's a nice little dinner party piece or networking event piece to mention to people.
Excellent. Listen, it's been an absolute pleasure, and getting all your insight into crafting a knockout newsletter, as the podcast is called, but actually just all those personal tips on the consistency, the tone of voice, images, the different platforms you can use, back everything up, or you don't have a business anymore. This is absolute gold for our listeners. So thanks ever so much.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot. It's been a lot of fun.
If you've got any feedback on today's episode, scribble it down on LinkedIn, X, or YouTube, or drop us an email at podcasts@businesscloud.co.uk. If you enjoyed the episode and found it useful, please like and subscribe on your preferred podcast platform to be among the first to hear insights from renowned entrepreneurs and investors. Thank you for listening, and see you soon. Launchpad is a Tech Blast podcast produced in partnership with pan-European B2B tech PR and communications agency Taito. New episodes are streamed on Tech Blast's YouTube, LinkedIn and Twitter pages from 12 p.m. on the final Friday of every month, while you can find all episodes on YouTube and all major audio podcast platforms. Subscribe now so you never miss an episode.